Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in December for our Coffee with SHS meeting. This is our um, fourth edition since we reactivated Coffee with SHS, and we're very pleased to discuss today seatbelt and scene safety, no excuses, as we move forward through this discussion. I think you're going to find it very informative and helpful, and we're excited about our guests today. So we'll go ahead and get going. Just a couple housekeeping notes. If you have questions throughout the discussion, please go into the chat box and log your question there. It'll be much easier to manage the questions through the chat box than to try to open up people's microphones and allow them to speak. So we appreciate you understanding that that's going to make it easier for us. And I appreciate that. I see that Chief Kerrigan has been able to join us, my co-host. He's traveling in the Great White North. So very grateful he's able to join us today. I also want to say a special thank you to additional safety, health, and survival section members who will be joining us today, Chief Emmanuel, Chief Emmons, and Chief Wayne. Thank you for joining us on this very important discussion that we're going to have today. So as I mentioned, today we are discussing seatbelt safety and scene safety, no excuses. I try not to spend a lot of time on social media, but recently it just seems like every other day I'm seeing some type of roadway incident involving fire apparatus, rescue trucks, law enforcement vehicles, all of the emergency responders. And I think that this is an appropriate conversation, particularly this time of year, as many law enforcement agencies are going to start talking about drinking and driving and all those initiatives as we move towards the new year, as they typically always do. So, but on the other hand, we need to make sure our firefighters and paramedics are all on their A game to protect not only the scene, but to be able to protect other responders who are working on scene. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of get going. I want to introduce our guest today. I'm going to start out. I have a bio that I'm going to read. So I'm going to read Jack Sullivan. Thank you for joining us today. He is the Director of Training, Emergency Responder Safety Institute. He is a subject matter expert on roadway incident operations and emergency personnel safety, promotes proactive strategies and tactics for protecting emergency workers from being struck by vehicles. He was a volunteer or is a volunteer firefighter, emergency medical provider, and chief officer for 23 years. In 2018, he retired from a 40-year career as a safety and risk management consultant for public and private sector. Jack teaches roadway incident safety and survival workshops for emergency responders for ERSI, and he is a master instructor for the FHWA, Traffic Incident Management Train-the-Trainer workshops. Although retired from active firefighting, Jack serves as a director of training for the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, where he has led the effort to develop the Responder Safety Learning Network that provides free online training all about aspects of roadway incident safety and traffic incident management. Jack is a member of the Safety, Health, and Survival section of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the Fire Department Safety Officers Association. In January of 2018, Jack was selected to receive the 2018 FDSOA Dave Dodson Lifetime Services Award. Jack is a member of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, and he was presented with an Excellence in Instruction Award at their annual meeting at the Fire Department Instructors Conference at FDIC in 2018. In 2021, Jack was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Virginia State Traffic Incident Management Committee in recognition of years of invaluable leadership and contributions to roadway incident safety nationwide. Jack was also named as the 2021 Colonial Virginia Chapter and Region 6 Safety Professional of the Year by the American Society of Safety Professionals. Jack served as a member of the Virginia Health and Safety Committee from 2012 to 2023. He is also a principal member of the National Fire Protection Technical Committee for NFPA 1091. So that's Jack is
You were always supposed to read the first couple of lines.
Yeah. Well, we can't do that.
Let's move along.
I think that you're going to see that he's going to bring a level of SME to our conversation. So, Dr. Clark, he has been in fire service for 55 years. He was the management science chair at the National Fire Academy. His degrees are in business and education. He served on 20 dissertation committees. He was a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University Center for Fire Safety Research and Policy. He is a board member for the Fire Service Psychology Association and expert technical reviewer for the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health Firefighter Fatality Investigation and Prevention Program. In 2021, he was inducted into the National Fire Heritage Center's Hall of Legends. In 2025, Fire Safety Journal Americas listed him as one of the 20 influencers. His book is I Can't Save You, You Don't Want to Die Trying, American Fire Culture. Dr. Burt studies the American fire culture from social, political, economic, and technological point of view. Thank you both for being part of our conversation today. And as you can imagine, these two gentlemen are very well versed in roadway safety. They bring a lot to the table. So to open it up, I'm going to start out with you, Jack, and then Dr. Burt will have you go after Jack. Just give us a brief synopsis of what drives you to do this research, to be part of the education for roadway safety.
Oh, that's an easy one for me. I can tell you I never expected nor had a desire to get into this particular topic, but as Dan will tell you, there was an event in March of 1998 on the Pennsylvania Turnpike that involved 10 of our personnel working a routine, in quotes, motor vehicle crash that resulted in 10 of those personnel being struck by an out-of-control tractor trailer. I won't go into all of the details. This story has been told many times through the National TIM training program and a variety of other places. But when you have 10 of your frontline personnel taken out in one incident, it gets your attention. I wasn't there that day. I wasn't on the scene. I had retired from that department as the fire department safety officer just a couple of years before the incident. And then working with the department after the incident itself, I started to dive into it to figure out what it is that we needed to do to protect our personnel at highway incidents. And I've been working on the subject ever since. One of our volunteer firefighters did not survive that incident. Firefighter Dave Good was a line of duty death, and the other 9 ended up in the hospital with various levels of injuries. And I'm happy to say that at least until today anyway, we have not had another incident from a struck by vehicle type crash where we've had that many first responders struck at the same time. And I hope we never do. But we've been working in a variety of different ways to try and prevent additional struck by vehicle line of duty deaths and injuries and property damage. One of the things we're looking at in the last few years is the amount of damage being done to fire apparatus being used as blocker vehicles at incident scenes. They were never designed to do that. And yet the cost associated with the damage to those vehicles is causing other problems in the fire service these days. So there's a lot going on this particular subject.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, almost every conference I go to, there's some discussion about the blocker type vehicles. There's a lot of departments, I think they're trying to be very proactive, and they use out of service or decommissioned fire apparatus, and they try to pretty it up so that it's easily seen from a distance. But as you said, that's, what happens when that gets crashed and crushed? Do they find another vehicle to step in and use? So, if it was made to take the impact, then maybe it's a different story. So, Dr. Clark.
Hi,
Yeah,
everybody.
so
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm not surprised at Jack's story. If you go back and look at anybody in the fire service that's made some kind of significant contribution, it's because they had some kind of significant emotional event in their life that changed them. Um, Even Chief Vinnie Dunn, who's well known worldwide, he will tell you it was about a collapse where firefighters were killed. That got him interested in that kind of stuff. Even going to Frank Brannigan, you know, Frank's whole obsession with building construction and how the fire service needs to know that. So I guess that the message I'm also going to try to say is that somebody listening to this is somewhere between 20 and 30, and they never get invited to go talk about stuff. They're never on podcasts. Well, find what it is that your passion is, and then you become the expert in it, especially if nobody else is interested.
Yeah.
Because now, all of a sudden, if you're an expert, it doesn't matter what rank you are, how many years of experience you have something that nobody else has, and everybody beats a path to your door. So that's how we all got here because the people before us gave us that secret, either consciously or subconsciously. That's how we learned that we saw them and they were our mentors. So anyway, now my case was back in 2004, Brian Hutton was a National Fire Academy graduate who took our firefighter safety and survival class, went home. About 9 months later, he fell out of his fire truck, no seatbelt, and died. When I read that case, I literally cried sitting at my desk at the National Fire Academy. I thought, how does that happen? Here we are at the National Fire Academy, one of our graduates, and we could not convince that guy to put his seatbelt on. I felt like a complete failure. That all the stuff we were doing at the fire academy, all the heady stuff, that simple little thing was not translating into people putting their seatbelt on. So that's when I started telling Brian's story. I made up this thing about the National Fire Academy Seatbelt Pledge. I gave it to my classes with Brian's picture on it. I gave it to other classes. And next thing you know, there's a National Seatbelt Pledge campaign to bring attention to this simple little thing. Because back then, we were having on average about 10 firefighter fatalities due to no seatbelts annually. And that had gone on for years. But with creating that program, it shined a bright light on that simple behavior. And then personally, I just started digging deeper into it to figure out why are we doing this? Because people were still just not clicking. And I realized that then I went to MIT. I went to take a class with Edgar Schein, a professor at MIT, on organizational culture. And what I learned from Schein is that culture is made up of social, political, economic, and technological factors that drive people's behavior. And so, although seatbelts look simple, it's complex because you can still see today. You were talking about vehicle crashes in your videos on YouTube and LinkedIn. Well, you see people recording themselves responding in fire trucks with no seatbelts on. There was actually a whole TV show, and I think the LA City Fire Department, where they followed them around responding to calls. They didn't have their seatbelts on, responding to these calls in the LA City Fire Department. And nobody threw the red card. That's a fundamental challenge for us as a discipline. And the connection I make is if we can't correct the seatbelt issue, what makes us think as a profession we can solve the more complex stuff on a fireground? That there's got to be thousands of things going on. And when you read the NIOSH reports, it's not because we don't know what to do. It's not because we don't have the equipment. It's because we choose not to do it the way we're taught. That's a fundamental cultural problem within the fire service discipline. And it's an uphill battle. We're still not there. After 20 years of seatbelt pledge, we're still not there. And hopefully, I'll read something near the end because the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation is going to relaunch the Seatbelt Pledge campaign in 2026 next year to try to revitalize and bring more attention to that issue. So that's my introduction.
Awesome, thank you. You mentioned something about the seatbelts, and I just flew back in town. I was away for a couple days, and on the on the planes, they always talk about the safety and the seatbelts, and they were talking about the things that we've been using in vehicles for the last 50 years. It still works the exact same way. Click it. But you also made another great point. If we are not doing something as simple as putting our seatbelts on, responding to and from calls, to and from training, to and from the store, whatever. What is that mentality? That mentality is saying that perhaps it's not that important. So then what happens when Mr. or Mrs. Smith needs, a medication, or they need a treatment, or we need to do something special, or even just basic when we get on scene of a fire. So you're right. It's very disciplined. I come from an athlete background. I often talk about the correlation between athletes and firefighting, and coaching and athletes. And it's always about the basics. When I coached, I taught the basics. I didn't teach kids how to be fancy and to do that's something they do have to do on their own. And a lot of the hot classes that are offered throughout the nation, that they're taking the basics and trying to streamline it or whatever. And that's awesome. But let's get the basics down. We go through minimum standards. We call it minimum standards for a reason. And one of the things that I think that we need to drill home in these academies, wearing the seatbelts, decon on scene, all the mental stuff, all the basic stuff that we need to be doing every day that we shouldn't have to think about, should be muscle memory. So I love the input. So I really want to tackle two topics today. First, the roadway safety, whether it's on a highway or whether it's in the middle of the town. Obviously speeds are going to be a little bit different in both different locations. So let's talk about that for a little bit, and then let's talk about safety, the seatbelts, because I think that is something that we need to drill home. And I'm pretty sure that everyone on this call, they know of firefighters that are not wearing their seatbelts or not wearing them consistently. I will raise my hand. I can think back. There was times when I didn't have mine on. I don't want to sound like I did everything perfect. I certainly did not. But there was times when my seatbelt didn't get on. I know there's a couple times I thought I plugged it in, I didn't, but whatever. But I'll own that, and now after 39 years in the fire service, and now my focus is on the health and safety of so many of our members. I want to make sure that they're doing everything that they can so they go home safe. Tampa 2. We talk about the life safety initiatives, and one of those is what? Seatbelts. So, but before we get into that, because that will become, I'm sure, a little bit emotional topic, because I'm very passionate about it. Obviously, Dr. Clark, you're very passionate about it. I'm sure, Jack, you are. But before we get going, I want to give Chief Kerrigan, do you want to chime in here? I know you got on a little bit late because you're traveling.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief so we can get to the experts here, right? I mean, I appreciate everybody coming on, and Jack, as he alluded to, we have that shared experience from Chester County from years back when that tragic turnpike incident happened. I've also been associated with fire departments that have had incidents on the highways that thankfully we did have blocking vehicles because they were used. And so it's a real thing. And when you mention speed, it's interesting because I can remember working in smaller city or urban departments where sometimes speed was an issue just on those side streets as well, depending on who the cops were chasing at the time. So it's universal, right? So this is a good topic, and I feel like we've come a long way. Conversely, I'm curious later on to hear more of Dr. Clark's perspective on the seatbelt thing because you know, I can remember when I was a young firefighter back in Myrtle Beach, and we actually had an assistant chief that would look out the window of the administration building when we were going down the street in a ladder, and he would look out to see if we had our seatbelts on when we were going past. It was an old open cab jump seat type canopy cab instead of a enclosed cab. And even as far back as whenever that was, 2000, 1999 or whatever, that was out there, but it was the minority opinion. It was most of the firefighters thought, what's this guy worrying this about this for, right? You know, and I just kind of got to thinking when he mentioned his opening, like I, I wonder what the issue is, the disconnect between us as human beings that drive in our family cars or whatever, and we put our seatbelts on all the time, 100% of the time for most of us. We teach our kids to do it. It's the law, by the way, right? That you're supposed to wear your seatbelt. And when you get out of your own car and you get into a fire truck, we still have this issue where firefighters just choose not to do it. It's a conscious decision.
Yep.
Anyway, good stuff. I'll be quiet. I'm sitting here in Toronto Airport, and hopefully you don't hear any background noise. But anyway, that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate your input. So, Jack, let's go ahead and start with you because roadside safety seems to be your wheelhouse. It's been your passion. What are we doing right? Let's start there. What are we doing right for the most part for roadway safety in as far as the fire service? I know law enforcement sometimes has some different perspectives here in Florida, where I live. Highway patrol, when they pull someone over, they pull off further off the road so their vehicles don't get crushed, versus blocking the way to protect them. So their perspective is probably a lot different than ours. But overall, what is your thought about how the fire service is doing, generally speaking?
Yeah, there's been a lot of improvements over the last 20 plus years, no question about it. And let me apologize. The grandson's over today, and him and the dog are doing laps out in the hallway outside my office right now. In 1998, when the crash happened on the turnpike, and I started doing some research on what we should be doing out there, I found two fire departments in the country who were already, three fire departments in the country who were already working on the problem. Fairfax County, Virginia, Plano, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona had all had struck-by incidents occur in their department somewhere along the way that led the safety officers in those departments. At the time, it was Lieutenant Steve Wiseman up in Fairfax County, Ron Moore down in Plano, and in Phoenix, there was a number of chiefs that I talked to, all of whom shared their SOP with me at the time. That was kind of funny because the documents that I got from those three departments were identical except for the cover page. And to this day, we don't know which department actually wrote the first version of that SOP. But one of the things that they had started doing back in the late 90s was to use the fire apparatus as a last line of defense to block at an incident scene to protect the firefighters and the victims they were responding to help in the first place. In 1998, though, that was not a common practice in a lot of places. So we started with blocking. We added in high visibility personal protective equipment, training for people, because one of the things that we're still struggling with is, especially in volunteer departments, a lot of the departments will require new members to complete Firefighter 1, EMTB, and hazmat awareness training. When they bring their certificates back to the station and talk to the chief, they get issued turnout gear and they're allowed to respond to emergency incidents at that point. But at that time, they've had no exposure whatsoever to working on a road or a highway of any sort. And unfortunately, Firefighter 1 classes around the country still do not include roadway incident safety aspects in the training. And we've tried to get that incorporated over the years. The problem is there's a whole lot of stuff these days that has to be crammed into Firefighter 1 training. In some of the career fire academies, we've been successful in including whether you call it traffic incident management or roadway incident safety training into the curriculum. But for some of the volunteer departments around the country, that's still got to be an additional class. So one of the things that we stress is there's got to be training for all of the individuals, at least initially when they first come on board or when they first start responding to incidents. And then it should be part of the annual in-service training rotation also to make sure that we go over any standard operating procedures or guidelines that might be in the department, and maybe review some of the struck by incidents that are happening around the country on almost every day of the week. John, I'll tell you right now, there are very few days that we go by that I don't get a notice from somebody around the country about a struck by incident involving just maybe property damage to an emergency vehicle or an injury to an emergency responder or, unfortunately, a fatality in some cases. We've had 32, as of today, 32 struck by fatalities across all disciplines in the country this year. And if I look back over the last 6 years, we've had over 300 struck by fatalities, just the fatalities. That's not injuries and property damage crashes, of personnel who were working at an incident scene and struck and killed by a vehicle. That includes the fire service, EMS, law enforcement, towing and recovery companies that are assisting us on crashes and things like that, road service technicians, and DOT safety service patrols. We're looking at all of those jobs because they're all doing the same thing we are. And when I first started teaching on this topic, I always referred to it as highway incident safety, but it became very obvious very quickly that these incidents occur on any roadway in any kind of road environment where you're exposed to moving traffic. So in the last 6 years, we've had 47 fatalities in fire and EMS related to being struck by vehicles, which means it's still a serious problem. On top of that, we've probably had 4 times or more injuries related to being struck by a vehicle and way more emergency vehicles, including fire apparatus worth well over $1 million these days, being struck and totaled. So the problem hasn't gone away, but we have improved on the training that we're doing, the blocking techniques, the communication, collaboration, and cooperation with the other disciplines. I can tell you that early on, there was still a lot of disagreements between law enforcement and the fire service on how to handle a roadway incident. I'm happy to say that I don't think we've gotten a report of any arguments between law enforcement and the fire service that escalate in about the last 6 or 7 years at this point. I think the National Traffic Incident Management training that Federal Highway put together has helped to create an atmosphere where we know that we're all working on the same problem and have to cooperate and collaborate together, and it's improved the communications a whole lot. So we're doing some things right. Problem is, we still got D drivers out there. They're drunk, they're drowsy, they're drugged, they're distracted, they're disturbed, they're disrespectful, and everybody's a me first attitude when they're driving their cars. And a lot of the things that we're doing to protect our personnel at the scene are what I call visually oriented. Whether it's flashing lights, high visibility graphics on our apparatus, signs, cones, flares, you name it, they all require the driver to be looking out the windshield and paying attention to where they're going. I think one of the new techniques and advances in technology that we're seeing has helped even more is what I call digital alerting technology, like Haas Alert, where the drivers in a vehicle will get an audible indication that there's an emergency scene ahead or an emergency vehicle ahead. That at least gets their attention and gets them to look out the windshield. Because as you stated earlier, a lot of these people are still looking at their phones. They're not actually paying attention to what they're driving. So things have improved, but we still got a lot of work to do.
So in your opinion, is it more of that we need to address collectively as a emergency services with the traffic? What am I trying to think? Do we need to work with the federal agencies to come up with better ways to alert? Because like you said, I remember putting out, parking an engine, laying out cones, flashing lights. We've talked about slowing down the rotators and slowing down the strobes and the chevrons, everything. We've done everything I think that's been scientifically proven as it alerts, hey, here's a problem. Even the way the chevrons are laid out, this way versus this way and all that stuff. But it still seems to be more of an issue perhaps with the D drivers, as you mentioned. Is there what can we do as a fire service with
One
the
of
federal
the
agencies to maybe make the auto industry do a better job of alerting when there's um, a crash or even I mean, I get alerts all the time for, kids, what do they call them, the blue alerts or the red alerts or whatever they're called again,
Amber
amber
alerts.
alerts. Those are all the time on my phone. And why can't that happen? And,
well, it can,
maybe.
and it's happening today. The digital alerting technology that's out there is doing exactly what you're saying. The problem is that there's a cost involved. Almost every new fire apparatus that's being constructed today is including a standard equipment, the transponders that are needed for that digital alerting. Now, the departments, when they take possession of that apparatus, have to activate that service. A couple of the manufacturers are automatically activating the service as part of their sales agreement for the first 2 to 5 years, something like that. But the departments have to use it. And we need to get more departments using it. So the cost is part of the issue. And the cost is, in the big scheme of things in the fire service these days, the cost is minimal compared to some of the other money that we're spending on fire apparatus and fire extinguishing aids and things like that. So it's one of those safety things that it's a decision that needs to be made by the administrative staff, whether they're going to put the money into it or not. And then once they have the service, to activate it and use it in all situations. And then part of our job in the fire service is to educate the public on how those systems work and how they can access that information. Now, the nice thing is that the guys who make the digital alerting technology have been working with all of the major auto manufacturers to try and get to the point where this information will come through the infotainment system in your vehicle, regardless of what you're doing in the vehicle. Stellantis has been able to do that in the Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram auto environment. Any vehicles made by that company from 2018 on automatically receive the digital alerting through the infotainment system. Anybody else that wants to get that information has to have a navigation system running, primarily Waze right now, but my understanding is that they are trying to incorporate that information into Google Maps. I don't know that they've been successful in doing it with the Apple navigation systems, but the technology is evolving and the answer is available. We just need to work on educating our members about it and getting them to implement that to help. The other thing we got to work on is advance warning at these incidents. And that's got to be a collaborative type arrangement where we can't depend on the fire service to do everything. We're responding to the incident to take care of patient care, to take care of extrication, fire control, whatever the case may be, hazardous materials. Now we've added on the responsibility of, in some cases, being the only traffic management that's going on at the incident scene. Where are law enforcement and DOT resources when we need them out there on the highway? We need safety service patrols everywhere, not just in the urban areas like they are now, but well available throughout all of the interstate system around the country and including in the rural areas. We've got a lot of work to do on that piece. We can't depend on the fire service to do it all by ourselves.
Chief Kerrigan, you had a comment? We may have just lost.
The changes in technology and so forth are going to come along. And if we look back 10 years from here, back 10 years, we're probably a lot better off. Another 10 years from now, we'll be even more better off. But I think back to a time where Jack, you'll know this, I stepped off an engine on Route 352 and came within a foot of getting plastered all over the highway at an incident scene where there were fire police everywhere, flashing lights everywhere, people waving their arms, telling the guy to slow down and so forth, and he drove through all of it. And so there's the human factor that's always going to, I know that you don't have an answer for this, obviously. That's why we do what we do, right? But that human factor is never going to be resolved 100% by all the technology. So, we still have to pay attention ourselves and be aware and block and do the things that we've been doing, because sometimes it doesn't matter how many alerting devices you're carrying or how many warning systems you have in your car. It's not going to work for certain people.
Exactly. I want to interject here. Appreciate that, Chief. For those who are on the call watching, and thank you. We have a couple questions that have popped up already. Please put your questions into the chat box, and then Taylor at the end we'll have about 15 minutes or so to kind of go through the questions, and we'll kind of go through those about that time. So thank you for the questions that are going in the chat box. Please feel free to continue to do that. But yeah, you made a good point, Jack, about we need to educate the public. That's what CRR is right now, right? We are trying to educate to protect our citizens as best we can, and one of those things is going to have to be, because I think we've done a pretty good job, as Chief Kerrigan mentioned earlier. We do a pretty good job at wearing a seatbelt in our personal vehicle. And I think that the public generally does a pretty good job of wearing their seatbelts. But it's all the other distractions, driving with their knees so they can be texting, and on the highway, no less, not just in the just in the city streets. So I like kind of where we're going in the discussion, and I'm sure that we'll address that more. But do you think, from the research that you've done, that what the fire departments are doing today with the chevrons, with the cones, with the now slowing down the emergency flashing lights, is there any science to support that some of that things? I know that the flashing lights, for instance, is one of the most recent changes. Is that effective?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there have been some studies done. We've got some reports that are on our website at respondersafety.com that are available for everybody to review. When we talk about emergency lighting, you can have all the chaos you want when you're responding to the incident scene. But once you get on location at the scene, we want to dim down those lights at nighttime a little bit. LED lighting is a major advancement in warning light technology, but it's also created some disadvantages. And we've heard loud and clear from a lot of people around the country that some of the LED lighting at nighttime is too bright and causing confusion, distraction, and the inability of people to see what's going on at the incident scene. By reducing the intensity of the lighting and reducing the flash pattern, we see a much better reaction from traffic that's passing the incident scene in those cases where we still have traffic passing the incident scene. So a lot of good has come from that, and still an awful lot of apparatus out on the street that doesn't have that technology yet. It's difficult to retrofit the new lighting technology into older apparatus because of the wiring that needs to be done. But most of the new apparatus that's being sold these days, all of the major lighting manufacturers have the same capabilities to put a system on board that will provide the right color combination, flash pattern, and intensity for the ambient lighting that you've got in the environment that you're working on at the time. Same thing with the high visibility graphics. We've always preached from day one, high visibility is fluorescent and reflective. There's a lot of discussion about color combinations. NFPA has changed their stance on that. What I've told people is it needs to be a combination of reflective and fluorescent. And you can pick any color combination you want as long as it passes that test. The reflective piece helps us at nighttime. The fluorescent piece helps during daylight conditions. That's the reason for both aspects of it. And I don't think there's any question, if you're out driving on the highways, you've seen the difference between apparatus with no markings on the back and apparatus with chevrons on the back. You can see them from a much further distance, no question.
Absolutely.
If you're looking out the windshield.
Yes, at least you should have someone looking out the windshield.
Yeah, right. Like the kid in the back seat. Hey, Dad, there's a fire truck.
Exactly. You kind of mentioned something, and I was of the opinion, now where I worked, we didn't have highways. When I was a driver, when I was a company officer, we didn't have highways. We had major roadways that people would get up to speed. But I often took the attitude of blocking the entire road. If we were going to be cutting, if we were, had to extricate in some way, shape, or form, I'm blocking the entire roadway. I'll take the heat from law enforcement because they want to keep it moving and all that. But I was more intent to protect my members. What is that attitude that you've come across the nation?
I would tell you over the years, the stance that I've addressed is this: if you need to block the highway when you first arrive at the scene, go ahead and do it. But there's some things that you need to do at the same time that you make the decision to block the highway. And what we've got to remember is we might be protecting our members and the victims of the initial crash, but now who we're putting in harm's way are the folks at the back of the queue, the civilians who are driving down the road at highway speed and all of a sudden see stopped traffic ahead of them. We've all been in situations like that somewhere along the way. That last person at the back of the queue is in the most dangerous position at that point. So we have to take steps. If we're going to close the highway, we need to make the appropriate notifications to our dispatcher to notify law enforcement and DOT that the road's blocked. And this is especially important on highways, limited access, high speed highways. The road's blocked, where it's blocked, and how backlogged or how big the queue is, depending on traffic conditions. Obviously, it's going to be worse during rush hour in the morning or the evening than it might be during the middle of the day. But we need to request resources to do what we call protect the back of the queue. That's where these safety service patrols come into play from DOT with their message boards and arrow boards. They should be able to position at the back of the queue to warn traffic of the stopped traffic ahead so that they know to slow down before they run into the traffic unaware that there's any stoppage ahead of them, especially if it's around a curve or over a hill or something like that, or in foggy situations where the visibility is deteriorated for some reason. So protecting the back of the queue becomes a high priority when you decide to block the road completely. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I would do it in a heartbeat, depending on the circumstances on arrival. Every incident we respond to on the roadway is going to be a little bit different. In some cases, we can work the incident on one lane or the other, one side of the road or the other. But in some situations, you're not going to have a choice. The road might already be blocked from the initial crash, or the circumstances are such that you're going to have to stop traffic. The idea then is take steps to protect the back of the queue.
Understood. Yeah, that's one of those things where you did think about that, and when we were within the county, within the city, law enforcement was relatively close by, and they could handle a good portion of that. And get out on the radio that there was a crash. So I appreciate that. That was a very informative. A lot of it that some of it has to be reminded of some of that stuff, that we have the devices and have what we need. There's still some things that we need to work on for the public, to protect the public. So let's kind of pivot a little bit, and Dr. Clark, let's kind of go into your wheelhouse, the safety, seatbelt safety. Why are firefighters not wearing? I suspect law enforcement probably isn't either. But why are we not wearing our seatbelts? We have policies,
right?
So.
Well, at the theoretical level, that's why I went back to Edgar Schein to try to answer that question: why, right? Why do people do some things and not others? And so Schein said that in any organization, there's three levels of culture. There are the artifacts. That's the stuff that you can see and touch. Then there's the espoused beliefs. That's what we say we do and why we do it. But then there's the underlying assumptions. Those are the invisible feelings, values. Schein refers to them as the DNA of an organization. And if you look at DNA is made up of genes. And genes, the various gene combinations, are what determine how the organism behaves. We also like the DNA example because DNA is passed down generation after generation after generation. So when I was at Johns Hopkins studying this, I went back to Ben Franklin to try to understand what drives fire service behavior from Ben Franklin to today with those three different levels: artifacts, espoused beliefs, underlying assumptions. And so through my research, and the hard part is that the underlying DNA are the genes. So through my study from Ben Franklin to today, my theory is my I don't even know if it's a theory yet. My idea is that the fire service is driven by six underlying DNA genes: fast, close, wet, risk, injury, and death. Those six things have driven what the fire service does since Ben Franklin, and probably even before that. And throughout that time period, all the other stuff, the artifacts and the espoused beliefs, they've all changed because of technology. But the underlying driving DNA has still remained the same. So when you apply that to seatbelts, in the beginning, the fire service would pull their hose carts to the fire, pulling with a rope, running, so because they had to be fast to get there to put the fire out, right? Now, if you're the first guy in line pulling that rope and you slip on the cobblestone streets and fall down, the other guys hanging onto that rope, they cannot stop that cart from moving. So that's why they put the T handle, which is a hard connection to the wheels, onto a cart. Those guys on a T handle, they were the brakemen. Their job was to turn that cart so it would stop running over the people that fell down. And when you look throughout history, firefighters were run over by their own hose cart and killed. So we've had that problem of being fast, and the technology we used wasn't enough to keep us from getting hurt. Throughout history in the fire service, the first horse-driven stuff, the drivers and people were thrown out because somebody came out of an alleyway and hit the thing, and people flew off. Probably some of the first seatbelts were ropes people tied around themselves. But there's still the whole notion of fast got in the way of everything else. And it's still that way today. If you talk to a firefighter and say, do you wear your seatbelt all the time? The chances are pretty good he or she is going to say no. And then when you say why, the first thing out of their mouth is, I got to be fast. So we put that notion into their head. And anything that is counteractive to that notion, even when we do donning our gear, we use a stopwatch. There's no seatbelt part of that donning and doffing. You should do donning and doffing in SCBA in context, meaning you start from the back of the fire truck with your stopwatch, you move up, you put your gear on, you get on, you put your SCBA on, you click your seatbelt, then the stopwatch closes. The stopwatch stops, right? Whether they can put their gear on in 60 seconds, that's irrelevant to the overall scheme of things in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. But time is something that's easy to measure. They'll yell at the fire station if they don't get out of the firehouse in 60 seconds or 90 seconds or 2 minutes at nighttime. That's really bullshit. It should be, did we get out of the firehouse correctly? In other words, everybody's seated and belted. That's more important than how fast we did it. So that notion of fast is a fundamental problem. Now, the other one in that frame, fast, close, wet, risk, right? If I'm a firefighter, what makes me a firefighter is I am willing to risk my life to save somebody else. We put that in people's heads. We put that in people's heads that Your job is to die, is to up to and including die trying to save somebody else. So that's why you're not supposed to die in your personal vehicle. That's why you put your seatbelt on. That's why you put your kid's seatbelt on. That's why you make everybody in your car put their seatbelt on. Because dying is not heroic in your personal vehicle. But we flip that upside down when we get on a fire truck. We have to be fast. We are expected to take that risk. And finally, death. Death. If you die in a crash without your seatbelt on, you become an instant hero. This is going to piss a lot of people off. You get the big dead fireman's parade. The federal government gives your family $340,000 or $350,000. Your name gets put on a plaque and your surviving spouse gets a flag. But they're still dead. That's dysfunctional to me. But I'm the only one that thinks that. But we decide, what do we think is heroic, right? I don't think that's heroic. I think that's dysfunctional. So all those things, fast, risk, and death, there's always two sides of that. One is like being an alcoholic and a drug addict. You're addicted to something that's getting you killed. So until somebody puts us in 28-day detox and says, no, this is unacceptable, we will continue that practice. And it even gets the whole risk thing and how that migrates into our organizational response. If you're a firefighter and you touch another firefighter inappropriately in some kind of sexual manner, the chances are you will be fired on the first offense. Because society says that is unacceptable. We are not allowed to touch each other inappropriately. But that same firefighter can ignore using a seatbelt and nothing happened to them. Now, and again, I'm the only one that thinks this way. Sometimes I think I'm the crazy one. But which one has more negative outcomes? Dead is a big negative outcome compared to, touching. Even that's bad, that's not dead. That may have some psychological stuff and some cultural inappropriateness, and you may need counseling, but you're not going to die as a result of it. So therein lies the problem. We are getting better. I'm a backstep guy, right? There were no seatbelts on fire trucks. But as time went by, we got better and better and better, but we're still not there, right? And if the discipline says, Clark, you're just full of shit, it'll eventually work itself out. That tells me that we're not serious about changing our culture. And I was the facilitator for the 16 life safety initiatives, #1, about changing our culture. So by us collectively figuring out how to change the seatbelt behavior, now we'll be better at changing the other stuff. Whether it's roadside safety, whether it's doing a complete 360, whether it's knowing that the house fire we're in has a basement in it. The $31.5 million lawsuit was just settled in Illinois. They didn't know the house had a basement in it until after the guy fell through it. What, 17 minutes into the call or something? I don't know. But what I would ask the question is, did all the people responding to that call wear their seatbelt? And if the answer to that initial question is no, I'm not surprised the other shit didn't get done right. They're directly connected. Directly connected.
Yep.
So that's why I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this. I mean, that you think this is valuable, because just like Jack was saying, we can wait for somebody else to solve the problem, or individually, every firefighter can decide today, the next time I get on a fire truck, I am going to make myself put my seatbelt on. That's an individual, conscious decision that every firefighter can make.
Agreed.
Right? You don't need permission. You don't need new equipment. You may need to practice a couple times to get your shit right. You may need to take the cheater plug out of your seatbelt in your jump seat, because they do sell them. You have to take that out, you know. But you can make that decision, and nobody can tell you can't do that.
Right.
If you're the driver, you can decide, I am not moving this fire truck until everybody's seated and belted. I don't care what anybody says. Same thing for the officer. We don't have to wait for somebody else. We don't need new technology. We don't need new training. It's an individual, personal decision. That's powerful. Maybe one person out of all the people watching this will say, that damn Clark, he embarrassed me. I'm going to see if I can put my seat. Because if you can't put your seatbelt on, you're not a good firefighter. I'm going to tell you that right now. Who's ever out there, if you don't wear your seatbelt, you're a lousy firefighter. Right? Because you can't do that simple thing.
It's minimum standards.
Talk about it's less than minimum.
Yeah.
A kindergarten kid can put their seatbelt on in their car.
Yeah.
If we can't do it, heaven help us.
Well, let me ask you, and I appreciate it, because you made a lot of great points, and my mind is just spinning right now. So one of the newest things, my wheelhouse is cancer prevention and awareness, and there's a lot of conversation about clean cab. So the bunker gear, the SCBA is in a cabinet in the back. The thought is firefighters get into trucks, they buckle in, and they go. Any science, any research showing that our firefighters are wearing their seatbelts more often in that circumstance than not? Or is there nothing?
Our science and research on seatbelts is practically zero.
Okay.
In preparing for this, I contacted the Fallen Firefighters Foundation and the U.S. Fire Administration, and I asked them, in your data set, when there's a firefighter vehicle-related accident, do you have a coding for a seatbelt or no seatbelt? And the answer was no. It's only anecdotal.
No. So we need to change some data points.
Well, that's what we talked about before, right?
Yep.
And part of that is maybe we don't want to know the answer. That's even worse than not knowing the answer if we don't want to know the answer.
Right. Well, and I suspect that some of the stuff that we don't want to know, we don't share.
Right.
You and I love that you make it's personal. When I go out and I talk about cancer, I talk about the men and women versus calling them firefighters, to make it personal. Because you're more likely to act responsibly when it's personal than when it's not. And that personal decision, and we kind of joked about it earlier, and I talked about this with a lot of chiefs. And when you talk to manufacturers, the Pierce and E1, well, you've got a policy to wear a seatbelt. They think because there's a policy, and the researchers I deal with, well, there's policies. That doesn't mean anything. That's just another thing for someone to not follow. It just gives me, as a chief officer, I find out I have a way to put a correction in place. And but you've got to make it personal as well, because you have to make that decision. You have to make a concerted decision Am I going to buckle in today or am I not? And
And
quite honestly, that's hard. It shouldn't be as hard as we make it, because it's the bravado. I'm big and bad, and listen, if I was in my 39 years, if something happened to me, I would have preferred it been on a fire than en route to or from. I don't want to have that big party, the big funeral, because I didn't wear my seatbelt. And I don't say that, in such a way that I don't want anyone to think that I don't think line of duty deaths are awful. They are. I'm working very diligently right now to minimize LODDs as much as I possibly can. But I also don't want to have that conversation where it makes it sound like we're, dying in a fire is better than dying with a seatbelt. I'm just telling you what my mentality was. I don't think that anybody should die in a fire. We need to do our job and we need to do it well. And there's things that you cannot skip. And as you mentioned, when you arrive on scene, if you've already skipped your seatbelt, what else are you going to skip during that incident? And that stuff we cannot. It's got to be click, 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 click as we go through, and we're doing a job, whether it's getting on scene, pulling the air brake, getting the pump in place, pulling that line, making sure you have your irons, make sure you have your tick, your SCBA, do the 360, all of that stuff.
That's why I talked about. And you asked, Chief, what was it between your ears? It's what do I think makes me a good firefighter?
Right.
And if wearing my seatbelt is not one of those measures that I put on myself, because that was not put into me, then I don't do it.
Yep.
Especially if everybody else around me doesn't do it. That's that
Yep.
normalization of deviance. But one person can change stuff.
Yeah. The fast
I
gene.
decide that me being a good firefighter means me wearing my seatbelt before I do anything. Well, and already, you better check your SCBA when you show up for shift and make sure you got your gloves in your hand, in your pockets. Right? Those are things that are just, but you got to add putting a seatbelt on, because that's when that tone drops and you're running and you're getting dressed. That seatbelt is part of your PPE, just like your hood, just like your gloves. And if you don't wear it, then you're already on that slippery slope of contributing to your own injury or death.
Chief Kerrigan.
Even I did this personally. If I was driving or riding in the front seat of the engine, the first thing I would do is get in and put my seatbelt on. I'm facing forward and I'm operating the vehicle. It's like no different than getting in your car to a certain extent. But I wonder how many people in the back facing the other way, they're the ones that are thinking this is going to slow me down possibly. If I have another thing to do, I have to get. It's kind of like Jack would tell you, there's data that shows if you're driving 65 miles an hour or 75 miles an hour from point A to point B, you're not getting there any faster. You're not getting there appreciably faster, but you think you are, you feel like you are. And so for me, it was always about, if I was up front, telling the people in the back, do that, right? And making it normal, making that normal, not wearing it normal. But how we perceive fast and the things that might slow us down, getting to the ultimate goal, putting out the fire or rescuing a person or whatever, has always been fascinating to me. And there is data out there, especially when you're driving and you're speeding. There's data out there that shows you that it's not true. It's not relevant. It's what you feel and what you think. It's not backed up or supported by actual facts.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing about this, the construct of fast in the fire service, because how fast we are in the scheme of things is irrelevant, really. What's more important is, when did the fire start? When was it discovered? When we were notified? Those three factors have more impact on the outcome than we ever will. Because you have fire deaths across the street from a firehouse. You have firefighters die because they fall out on the front ramp when the apparatus turns and the door opens up and they fall out, right? So that notion of fast in terms of how we think that our answer to that question is the most important piece, it's not. That's why the dysfunction of the fast, close, wet, risk, injury, and death model, it's mostly dysfunctional when it's limited to the manual fire protection theory that people on pumpers have to go put the fire out. Whereas if we turn it upside down and make the primary method of fire protection in the country an automatic built-in fire protection, then how fast we are becomes even less relevant. Because the smoke alarm goes off, people get out, the fire sprinkler goes off, knocks the fire down, and we get there and mop up. So that's
Agreed.
how it fits into the bigger scheme of things in terms of that fast, close, wet, risk, injury, and death.
Agreed. It's funny. I was reading, I don't know whether it's an article or something on one of the social media, either this morning or yesterday, and it was talking about turnout time. Because now most of us have MDTs, you just hit responding, but it's still 2 minutes sitting in the station before you get out of the house. As a chief officer, I'd go to a station and alarm would come in, and they're at the dinner and eating and drinking. I'm like, someone just called for help. We need to get up and get going. I'm not talking about running out of the station necessarily, but the alarm comes in, your truck is called, you stop what you're doing and you go. That's what we're called to do. You hit now they're connecting the wheels rolling with the responding or en route. And I think that that's awesome. Not to try to get people to rush and run and drive fast. We still need to be collected. We need to be calm. We are that source that's going to come to that worst day and do our best to make it better. But we have to stay calm to do that. Running and doing all that, it's going to mess us up. So we got to slow it down a little bit, but be moving and put your thoughts together and get going, which includes firefighter safety first. I've taught CPR for years. I've taught at the fire academy for years. And what do we always preach? Firefighter safety first. And that starts when the bell rings, getting to the apparatus, climbing up in the apparatus, whether it's bunker gear or duty uniform, and buckling in and getting ready to go. And why that keeps getting skipped, it fascinates me that, and I appreciate your thoughts on this because I think that you are spot on with this. And I just, in my head, I still, because I work diligently to try to make sure I did it the right way as a firefighter, then a driver, as an officer. First admit, I did not always do it right, but I did my best to do it as right as I could a majority of the time. And now that I'm as chief level, you start thinking and you see things differently, and your relationship with your firefighters is very different today as a chief officer to see someone get hurt or injured or worse yet, someone die. So getting these things and putting these efforts in place, and we have to have those policies, but we have to have the reinforcement.
Yes.
I've often thought that when I teach at the academy, and before we even had this conversation, we should have seatbelts on the chairs. So it's an automatic thing. They sit down in the lecture room, buckle their seatbelt. So it becomes something that they always do. But I really liked your analogy earlier about when we time them to getting in their PPE, start at the back of the truck, get their bunker gear on, climb up in the truck, buckle the seatbelt after you get your SCBA on. That's awesome. And that's a small change. That's a little change that I think would have a tremendous impact because that's more realistic of what the men and women are doing when they go to a call.
Right.
And if that's just habit and they train for that way for 8, 12, 16 weeks, whatever it is, and they're doing it every day over and over again, I think that's more of a win because you do it subconsciously. So that's awesome. So I know we're kind of wrapping it up. So let's, Taylor, can you kind of go through some of the questions? I know that we sent out some stuff yesterday, and I asked you to kind of clump that together and direct some questions, because I think that this is going to be really, really helpful with this portion with the question and answer.
Hey, John, can I get one more thing in real quick?
Sure.
I'm authorized to say this, but I have to read it. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation is giving the International Fire Service Seatbelt Pledge an upgrade, providing more streamlined user experiences while continuing to promote the importance of firefighter restraints and moving apparatus. The upgraded seatbelt pledge will go live in early 2026 with a concentrated effort to gain signatures and commitment before and during FDIC 2026. Stand by for more details to come. Thank you.
Awesome. And to that point, we're going to attach a few things, PowerPoints, information, resources to this recording, so that in the future, if any of you who are listening, you want to share it with those around you, they will have some other resources that they can go to. Taylor.
Yes. So I have questions that were submitted in the chat, that were emailed to me, that were included when people registered for the event. So I will go ahead and start feeding them to you all. And if anything else comes up, people can submit new ones in the chat as well. And some of this, we've hit on in this conversation, I think. But how does complacency creep into the roadway responses, but more specifically, what are some early warning signs that the leaders in the station, both official leaders and officers and unofficial leaders and people just look to them and follow them, be watching for that would cause problems in roadway responses?
Two easy answers to that, I think. One is there's some sort of training being done on traffic incident management or roadway incident safety in the station initially and on at least an annual basis. Is there an SOP, and is it the department in line with NFPA 1550, which is the firefighter safety and health standard, has an entire chapter on traffic incident management. And it covers the basics of what every fire department should be doing to protect their personnel at roadway incidents. So the question is, do you have training in place? Do you have an SOP in place? Are you in line with the NFPA standards? I think that's a great first start. And if not, that's a warning sign that you have work to do.
That's fair. So a question for both of you. Why haven't the traditional policies, standards, and training been enough to solve this problem? Because I'm confident almost every department, I won't say every, because I would be wrong, somebody would have an example, but almost every department has a seatbelt policy and several roadway safety policies in terms of, blocking and reflective gear, etc. So why haven't the traditional policies, standards, and training been enough to solve this problem?
In terms of seatbelts, if the officer and the driver don't enforce the policy, people don't do it. It's as simple as that. And if the firefighter doesn't have an internal clock or internal system that says, I'm going to do this, even if the people around me are not, it's very difficult. You have to adapt to the norm of the group. And if you go to a station that doesn't do it and you're the only one that does, you have to have a lot of courage to stand up to them. And it's easier to go along with the crowd than it is to say, hey guys, I'm wearing my seatbelt. I don't care whatever you do. Right? If I won't get dressed until I get there. If you can call me every name you want to, but I'm not doing it until my seatbelt's on. I mean, that takes a lot of courage when everybody around you doesn't. Or if you're the driver and you say, we're not moving, and you got an officer that's beating on you, that takes a lot of courage. Doing it the right way, everything is more challenging than just doing it the wrong way if everybody around you is doing it the wrong way. That's how I would answer that question.
And I would tell you, unfortunately, on the roadway incident safety stuff, there are still an awful lot of departments who have not created an SOP, done the training for their personnel, or created some sort of guidelines for them to follow when they set up at a roadway incident. And it's easy to tell by looking at video from traffic cameras and everything else that's available to us today to see very quickly whether a department has the training and an SOP by the way their apparatus is positioned and the way their members are operating on the scene versus when they don't. Um, it, I'd like to say certainly there are more departments doing it today than there were 25 years ago, but at the same time, there's still a lot of departments that are not doing what we would hope they would be doing at a roadway incident.
Okay. So this question was in the chat. How can the fire service more effectively collaborate with civil and construction engineers and design roadways that would improve the emergency response access and firefighter safety while they're operating on them? And do you have any engineering solutions that you've thought of or that you've seen that you would suggest?
Lots. And DOT tells me they don't have the money for it.
Okay.
So, John Sullivan, a brother from another mother that's on line today, answered that question already with probably the first recommendation I would make, and that is regional TIM committees, regional traffic incident management committees, with representatives from all the different disciplines getting together periodically to talk about roadway responses, good, bad, and otherwise, and what needs to be done or improved. And that should include representatives from your Department of Transportation in your area. And the couple of areas that I know that need work, crossovers. Those folks who have crossovers on their high-speed limited access highways to get from the northbound side of the highway to the southbound side of the highway or vice versa, those crossovers very often are simply just an opening in the median with no deceleration or acceleration lanes available to allow apparatus to slow down safely to enter the crossover and then get up to speed and merge in with traffic as they come out on the other side. And we've seen a number of crashes and fatalities from apparatus moving from one side of the highway to the other through those median crossovers that could be much better engineered if DOTs could find a way to do it. And in some cases, fire departments have to ask for that and push for it, especially when construction work is being done on the highway in their area. Make sure that that communication, collaboration, and cooperation is in full force. And that's where TIM committees can play a major role.
Thank you, sir. I believe I know what Dr. Clark's answer to this one is going to be, but if you could change just one habit in every firehouse related to roadway response safety, what would it be and why?
Yeah, well, let's get there safe first, right?
Yeah, you got to get there safe, and putting your seatbelt on, that's the first step. And certainly for roadway safety, once you unbuckle it and you're going to get out, look to the left and look to the right to make sure nobody's coming. I mean, that would certainly be another one.
Yep. Plain and simple. And wearing the right gear.
Yeah.
You know, there's just like seatbelts, high visibility personal protective equipment is not a favorite out there on the fire ground. It's not always necessary if you're wearing your turnout gear, depending on the circumstances and what you're working on at the time. But there are so many situations that I see where folks are packing equipment back on the truck, putting hose back on the truck or whatever, where they should be wearing high visibility PPE, and they're not. And in most cases, departments have made it available. And again, it's the boss has to make it clear. Whoever the boss is on the rig that day has got to make it clear. Now's a good time to put your PPE on, change out from your turnouts to your vest or whatever the case may be. It's got to be, the leadership has to take a role in creating the atmosphere where it's okay to do it and that it's enforced.
So I think you kind of just answered the next question, which was, what are the simplest and most enforceable or most easily enforceable habits that could legitimately reduce injury and death?
Well, high visibility PPE is one. Obviously, using the apparatus for a block is another. But at the same time, that fire apparatus being used as a block was supposed to be the last line of defense to protect the members and the victims of the original incident from oncoming traffic. We really need law enforcement and DOT to step up and help with advance warning to protect that valuable apparatus that was never designed to be a traffic control vehicle, to make sure that we're doing the best we can to advise traffic before they get to the incident scene. Advance warning, we refer to it as, that something's going on up ahead. Sit up, pay attention, look out the windshield, follow directions, and watch where you're driving, not necessarily watch the incident scene. And our folks have to know that. They've always got to be aware of the traffic around them. If traffic is actually passing the incident scene, somebody's got to keep an eye on what's going on and make sure that you're deploying whatever protective devices you can to make sure that there's a traffic incident management area to help direct traffic around your work area and protect your personnel and the victims.
I wanted to just add something to this conversation. It's interesting, and I agree 100% with the idea that the drivers and the bosses in the front seats need to be able to have the courage to reinforce the behaviors that we're expecting, whether it's putting your seatbelt on or wearing the safety vest if you're going to a roadway incident or whatever. Um, it certainly is for them to be reinforcing behaviors and procedures and so forth. But I kind of use this analogy. Maybe it's a little bit far off, but I don't think so. Like if you always go to fire training and you always do your live fire training and you always pull the 1 3/4 water line to put out the fire at the fire training school, 90% of the time that's going to work when you go to the next house fire or whatever it may be. But if you don't ever train to pull the 2 1/2 for the commercial building fire or the strip mall or the taxpayer, then when you pull up to that fire, guess what you're going to do? You're most likely going to pull the 1 3/4, just like you did at training, where you were taught this is the line that you pull when you do this. So building these behaviors into training is really, really, really important. It adds the repetition. It adds, when you do simulated drive ups to incidents at training, the first thing you should be doing is, once you get on the rig after your gear's on, is making sure you put your seatbelt on. It's as simple as that. As you start doing it in simulated incidents, and if you're getting off the rig at a simulated accident on the highway or whatever, that you have your vest on or whatever your policy says it should be. Like if you have to do this stuff in training, and it has to be practical and replicate the things that we're doing on the scene, just like structural firefighting. You can't just pull the same line every time, or that's what you're going to pull when you need something else. So we've got to integrate this stuff, not just by policies and procedures. We've got to get people doing it on the training grounds and in the fire academies and making it just become part of the fabric of what we do.
If I may, the other piece too, Chief, I agree 100%, but there's something in the human psyche. For example, you could probably not force a firefighter to touch bodily fluids with their bare hands, because it's not heroic to die of some kind of infectious disease. So why do we understand that concept, but we don't understand the concept of putting our seatbelt on to the same level or putting our vest on to the same level? And that's part of that cultural thing we have to crack. And I think it goes back to, because it's not heroic to die of some kind of infectious disease. So we put our BSI on, right? We don't, and you rarely have to order anybody to put their BSI on. So somehow the message we have to send is that it's not heroic to die anyway because you're a firefighter. And all that stuff that we give you is to keep you from dying from an occupational fatality. That's why I'm the only one that says we should call firefighter fatalities occupational fatalities as opposed to line of duty deaths. And I'm the only person that thinks that, and I probably always will be, but that's just stuck in my mind at that cultural level as to why we continue to have that something in our brain wiring that sees a difference between those things. I'll be quiet now.
Well, I thank you both, Dr. Clark and Jack, for your participation today and being our guest. I think it was very informative information. And going back to what Chief Kerrigan mentioned, I wonder sometimes to kind of, particularly with the roadway safety and the seatbelts, we have a lot of policies. We should be able to train on a policy to make it so it's something that we actually do and we actually enforce, and there's a way to do that. I think that we need to continue to train our people for the little things. It's not just the big things, not just pulling the hose lines, whether it's 1.5 or 2.5 or whatever, setting up the master stream. That's all important. Doing RIT training, that's important. After burns, coming out and doing on-scene decon, wearing seatbelts, all of that stuff that isn't as glamorous, we still need to focus on and we need to train with, because it needs to be mentally and it needs to be second nature, that it just happens. So I think that is that's my big takeaway from today. Quite honestly, is that we need to train on these things that we've always kind of taken for granted. In my personal vehicle, I always wear my seatbelt. Why isn't that the same when I get in a fire truck, when I'm working, when I'm doing the job? Why are we not, being more alert? I remember when I first became a driver and I was blocking the roadway, and I parked it in such a way that I was trying to be careful for which side of the pumper was facing oncoming traffic. Was there a fire? Wasn't there a fire? Because on our officer side, that's where all of our EMS equipment was. Yeah. So if the car's on fire, now I've got to stand. So that makes a difference. So do we need to get another company? So there's some things I think that we can work on in the future. But I thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for being on the call today. We appreciate it very much. Our next call is going to be January 15th at 11 a.m. The topic is going to be firefighter cancer awareness. And at least two of the guests you will know very well. Retired Chief Frank Lieb from FDNY and Dr. Gavin Horn. We're going to have a great discussion about firefighter cancer awareness and education and all that. We're really looking forward to all of this. So we're excited to be doing coffee with SHS again, and we're so excited that you're here. I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you on January 15th. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the year.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.